She didn't flinch when the gun was drawn. No scream, no sudden breath. Just her eyes, steady, unblinking, as the officer's fingers brushed his holster. She'd been pulling weeds beneath a stone bench, gloves on, rake nearby, a backyard like any other, until the gravel crunched. Two officers, weapons raised. Then came the low growl of tires, a black SUV, slow and silent. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The officers turned. The SUV door opened. A man stepped out, straightened his coat, and said, "We've been trying to reach you, Director Voss." The officers froze, and miles away in a sealed government system no one could access, a single prompt lit up. Override pending. On paper, she was just another resident in the neighborhood. A quiet woman in her late 40s, hair usually tied back, gloves on most mornings, tending to her garden with the patience of someone who had seen time stretch far beyond seasons. To the neighbors, she was polite, distant, but never rude. She didn't gossip at the mailbox, didn't attend HOA meetings, didn't join the holiday barbecues. She paid her dues, trimmed her hedges, and nodded with a soft good morning when spoken to. But there was something about her that made people pause. Not fear, not distrust, just uncertainty, like they could never quite place her. Mrs. Adler across the street often whispered, "Lovely woman, but I've never seen her laugh." And I swear, her hands, the way she holds the rake, it's like she's holding a rifle. To most, she was just a bit odd. To others, she was invisible. But behind those quiet eyes and guarded routines was a past no one could guess. There were signs, if anyone had looked closely. The way she scanned every street before stepping outside, the muscle memory in her posture, back straight, shoulders aware, every motion deliberate. She never fumbled for keys. She never looked down at her phone while walking. And her dog, when she had one, didn't bark. It watched. Some thought she might have worked in security. A few speculated she was an FBI retiree. You know, one of those people they can't talk about. But no one ever asked her, and she never offered. In a country where loudness often equals importance, Rebecca Voss was the kind of woman America forgets. The quiet ones who served and never told. The ones who came home and chose silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they'd already said enough with their actions. We celebrate the uniforms. We honor the medals. But what about the women who don't look like warriors? What about the ones who disappear into neighborhoods with dusty gloves and quiet dignity? Too often we misjudge them. We call them cold or strange or antisocial. We forget that silence can be a form of protection, not from the world, but from memories. Rebecca never spoke about the war. Not to neighbors, not to family. Maybe she had orders. Maybe she had reasons. Or maybe silence was the only place she still felt in control. But that morning, as gravel crunched and weapons raised, her stillness wasn't confusion. It was readiness. And in that moment, the officers didn't realize the truth. They hadn't drawn weapons on a civilian. They just stepped into the orbit of someone who had once given orders that altered the fate of nations. Someone whose silence was more powerful than most people shouting. And across America, there are more like her. Women who served, women who led, women who were told to fade quietly into the background, and did until they were needed again. Rebecca Voss didn't seek attention. She didn't demand recognition. But when the system locked down, when names and ranks failed, it was her name that broke the silence. And maybe, just maybe, that silence wasn't emptiness. It was authority waiting to be heard. The call came in at 8:17 a.m. A concerned neighbor, no name given, just a clipped, urgent tone. "There's a woman across the street. She's, I don't know, digging or hiding something in the yard. She's out there every morning, doesn't talk to anyone, and yesterday I saw wires. You should check it out." The dispatcher logged it as possible suspicious activity. No criminal offense, no threat. But enough, in today's nervous climate, to dispatch a patrol unit. By 8:42 a.m., 2 officers were outside the low wooden gate. Rebecca didn't see them arrive. She was kneeling by a weathered stone bench, gloved hands gently clearing weeds around its base. They called out once. She didn't answer. Earbuds in, perhaps. They entered the yard cautiously, protocol in mind but suspicion sharpening their nerves. When her head finally turned, she didn't flinch. One officer's hand instinctively hovered near his holster. "Ma'am," he said, voice tight, "I need you to step away from whatever you're doing." There was no threat in her posture, no weapon. Just a woman kneeling beside a patch of earth, back straightening slowly, gaze meeting theirs. Calm, measured. She didn't speak. She didn't run. She simply stood, brushed dirt off her gloves, and nodded once, as if they were the ones out of place. That moment hung in the air. For most people, an officer's approach is enough to rattle nerves. For many, it's a spark of fear. But Rebecca's silence didn't come from defiance. It came from experience. She understood tension. She'd lived in rooms where hesitation cost lives. She knew how to de-escalate, not with words but with presence. Still, the officers misunderstood. To them, her lack of reaction wasn't discipline. It was unnerving. One muttered under his breath, "What's she hiding?" The truth? Nothing. But in a world where privacy is suspect and calm is mistaken for arrogance, Rebecca Voss became a target of modern paranoia. We live in an age obsessed with visibility. People share breakfast photos, live stream their errands, volunteer their entire histories online. In that world, someone like Rebecca, private, quiet, anonymous, becomes suspicious by default. And in small towns where everyone knows everyone, being unknowable is almost a crime. Mrs. Adler, the neighbor who likely made the call, had long resented the woman across the street. "She never waves. She doesn't decorate for Christmas. Always in that yard, always alone. What's she hiding?" But Mrs. Adler never considered the irony. That Rebecca's solitude wasn't a wall, but a shield. Not from people, but from memories. And now the very skills that had once saved lives overseas were being read as threat signals. Steady hands, too confident, unblinking eyes, cold, Abrimucht, no explanation. Must be hiding something. But Rebecca wasn't cold. She was calculating. Not because she wanted to harm, but because she'd spent decades in a world where a single wrong word could compromise lives. As the officers waited for backup, tension brewing, Rebecca did something unexpected. She took off her gloves slowly, laid them on the bench, and sat. Calm, still. It wasn't surrender, it was control. She wasn't complying. She was choosing not to escalate, and they felt it. Even if they didn't understand it, they felt it. That subtle, unmistakable energy of someone who'd been trained to lead under fire, who'd seen combat not from a television screen, but through the cracked glass of real consequence. They didn't know her name yet, didn't know her record, didn't know she'd once been called Ghost Operator VOR9 in a world most of them weren't cleared to acknowledge. All they saw was a woman who refused to be afraid. This moment reflects a deeper truth about our culture. We mistake silence for secrecy. We see calm as suspicious, especially when it comes from women. And worse, we've built a society where difference invites confrontation, not curiosity. Rebecca wasn't doing anything wrong, but she didn't look right to someone, didn't smile enough, didn't wave enough, didn't perform the script of acceptable womanhood, and so she became a suspect. But when the black SUV rolled in, silent, steady, and the man stepped out with purpose in his eyes, the officers would realize their mistake. Because some names don't show up on Google, some legacies aren't printed on medals, and some people only speak when the world needs to listen. The tension hadn't yet broken when the gravel groaned. Not beneath boots or feet, but tires. Wide, heavy, deliberate. The officers turned, so did Rebecca. The sound wasn't loud, but it had weight. The unmistakable hum of reinforced engines built for silence and speed. A black SUV crept into the driveway, unmarked. No sirens, no decals. But everything about it screamed, not local. Its paint was matte, not glossy. Its license plate had no state, just a string of numbers. And it didn't park, it positioned. Precision like a chess piece locking into place. Officer Daniels instinctively stepped back. Morrison lowered his hand from the holster, but only just. Neither knew what this was, But they both knew this wasn't a routine backup call. Then the door opened. A man stepped out, late 40s, clean cut, posture like steel wrapped in linen. No badge, no weapon in sight, just a dark coat, black tie, and a lapel pin shaped like a falcon. He didn't look at the officers. He looked only at her. "We've been trying to reach you, Director Voss." The words sliced the air. Director. Not ma'am, not miss, not subject. Director. In that moment, everything shifted. Officer Daniels blinked. Morrison furrowed his brow. Director? The man didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. He simply opened the SUV's rear door and waited. Rebecca didn't say a word. She rose from the bench slowly, like a curtain drawing back, brushed her palms against her legs, adjusted her jacket, and then just nodded. "I wasn't hiding," she said quietly. "I was waiting." Her voice was calm, firm, not loud, but it didn't need to be. It landed like a coded frequency, activating something only a few people could hear. The man gave a slight incline of his head, then turned to the officers for the first time. "These two bothering you?" Rebecca glanced at them. No emotion in her gaze, just evaluation. Then she shook her head. "They're just doing their job," she said. "Badly." No anger, no sarcasm, just a flat truth spoken by someone used to giving orders that weren't up for debate. The man didn't smirk. He didn't apologize on their behalf. He simply held the door open and said one sentence. "We need you. It's active." To the officers, those words meant nothing. To her, they meant everything. She stepped inside the SUV. No hesitation, no look back. The door shut with a sound too soft for its weight. Then the vehicle was gone. Not rushed, not loud, just gone. Officer Morrison let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Did she say, Director?" Daniels didn't answer. He just kept looking at the empty driveway like it had opened a doorway into another world. Because it had. Rebecca Voss had vanished from their jurisdiction, but not from their memory. She hadn't resisted, hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. That's what real leadership looks like. It doesn't swagger. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't post updates or seek approval. It stands still while others tremble. In an age of loud voices and viral personalities, we often mistake visibility for value. We equate leadership with charisma, noise, or popularity. But the kind of authority that lasts, the kind that matters, isn't about being noticed. It's about being needed. Rebecca Voss didn't announce herself. She didn't wear a uniform or flash credentials. She simply was. And in that simple, grounded presence, there was more command than any badge could offer. The man in the coat knew it. The officers felt it, even if they couldn't explain it. And somewhere far away, sealed systems had already begun to respond. Because real power doesn't need an audience. Real power walks into a room, or a backyard, and says nothing, but shifts everything. The SUV didn't head toward any known government building. It bypassed city streets, exited the main road, and rolled for miles into territory no civilian GPS could map. The sun had barely cleared the tree line when they passed the final checkpoint. A camouflaged entry gate masked beneath a construction facade. They were entering Joint Operations Command. Inside, it was chaos under control. Personnel in black and gray moved with purpose, heads down, voices clipped. Large monitors flickered with encrypted readouts, satellite uplinks, code blocks, and red alerts. The air felt heavier, not frantic but tight, like tension had been pressurized into protocol. Rebecca stepped out without a word. No ID badge, no clearance wristband, just her steady walk, one foot in front of the other, eyes scanning everything. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for directions. She didn't need to. But security still tried to stop her. "Ma'am, you can't be in here." The young analyst barely finished the sentence before a commanding voice rang out. "Let her through." All heads turned. Colonel Ramirez stood at the far end of the room. His uniform was sharp, but his eyes widened with something rarely seen in a man of his rank. Recognition and respect. "That's Director Voss, Everyone below Tier 4, out. No one questioned him, not because of the stars on his shoulder, but because of the fear in his tone. The room cleared in 20 seconds. Rebecca moved straight to the central console. No small talk, no introductions. She picked up the folder still open from the last briefing and scanned it once. 30 seconds, one page, two columns of code. She tapped the screen with a gloved finger. You're reading the shutdown key backwards. Silence. An analyst blinked. Sorry? She pointed again, calm but firm. The last four digits aren't a code, they're a date. That was all she said. It was enough. Because the moment she said it, everyone saw it. March 14th, 2007. The origin date of the AI subroutine. The entire failsafe protocol had been reading it as hexadecimal, not timestamp, which meant every override command entered so far had been fundamentally misaligned. 18 hours, 3 full teams, thousands of man-hours, and not one of them had noticed. She had when 10 seconds. Ramirez stepped closer, quieter now. How did you? She closed the file. I wrote it. No bravado, no ego, just fact. The kind that didn't require proof, because the system itself had already begun to respond. By the next 5 minutes, she had taken control of 3 satellite uplinks, rerouted the perimeter firewall, and cross-authenticated an AI subchannel most of the room didn't know existed. She didn't give long orders. She didn't bark commands. She just moved, and everyone followed. Because when someone walks with certainty, you don't wait for permission. You keep up. She wasn't interested in rank. She didn't ask who was in charge. She simply was. She didn't need a call sign, a clipboard, or an armed escort. Every system that had rejected protocol was now unlocking with her voice, her gestures, her instinct. And somewhere along the control deck, one junior officer whispered, "Who is she?" Ramirez answered without looking away. "She's the contingency plan." Back at the console, Rebecca didn't look triumphant. She didn't gloat. She didn't ask for thanks. She simply pointed to the blinking red line on the screen and said, almost absently, "You're reading the shutdown key backwards." That was all it took. 3 full teams had stared at the same problem. Military minds, code breakers, contractors with 6-figure clearances. They treated it like a logic puzzle. She saw it like muscle memory. That wasn't intellect. It was experience. The kind that came not from textbooks, but from nights when failure had consequences no one could debrief. In rooms like this, expertise tends to shout. But sometimes what you need is someone who speaks softly. Someone who's already failed where the rest haven't even started. The analysts had followed protocol. But Rebecca? She remembered why the protocol existed in the first place. The codes they struggled to unlock. She'd helped write them. The system they feared. She'd once helped build it. That kind of knowledge isn't theoretical. It's personal. You can't out-train instinct. You can't outvote lived memory. And you can't override the one who designed the override in the first place. This wasn't the first time a war room had forgotten who laid its foundation. But today someone had returned, not to remind them with speeches or stripes, but by doing what no one else could. She turned toward Colonel Ramirez without ceremony. "Give me a tactical van, minimal crew. I'll handle the entry." He hesitated. "Alone?" She nodded. "If I go with someone, we'll argue. If I go alone, it'll listen." Ramirez didn't ask what it was. He just nodded, because by now even the highest-ranked men in the room had realized this wasn't their mission anymore. It was hers. It was nearly 300 when the van rolled to a stop outside the perimeter. The facility loomed like a sleeping beast, angular, dark, silent. No lights, no movement, no signal, no sound. It had been sealed for over 18 hours. Standard protocol called for a squad, maybe even a drone-assisted team. But this wasn't a standard mission. Rebecca stepped out alone. She wore no armor, carried no rifle, just a soft-shell tactical coat, a small wrist device blinking faint blue, and a clipboard she hadn't looked at once. 2 techs escorted her to the airlock, each keeping a respectful 2 steps behind. One of them finally worked up the nerve to ask, "Ma'am, are you sure you don't want someone in there with you?" She didn't break stride. If I go with someone, we'll argue. If I go alone, it'll listen. No one knew exactly what she meant, but no one challenged her. The decontamination corridor was ice cold. Metal walls hummed with residual static. Emergency lights pulsed a dull red every few seconds, casting her shadow in pieces along the steel panels. She didn't flinch. The outer door sealed behind her. The inner door took longer, scanning her twice before hissing open. She stepped into the heart of the biointelligence facility and was met with silence. Monitors were dead, consoles offline. Servers hummed in low, irregular pulses, like something alive but wounded. The AI hadn't spoken to anyone in hours. It had denied access to generals, coders, and even its own creators. But the moment she stepped past the final threshold, a soft chime echoed through the darkness. A light blinked on at the far end of the room. And then a voice, mechanical, flattened, but eerily familiar. Unrecognized presence. Clearance denied. Please exit the control bay. She paused, took a breath. Override Wraith 09 Romeo. A long silence. Then, override accepted. Welcome back. Director Voss. Lights flickered. Monitors began to reboot. The hum of the facility evened out. It hadn't shut her out. It had been waiting. She walked slowly past the consoles, placing her hand on one of the warm panels like greeting an old friend. Screens flooded with unread logs. Error messages evaporated in real time. The core system sync began automatically, without prompt. A technician watching from the external monitoring room whispered, "What's she doing?" Colonel Ramirez, watching the same feed, answered softly, "She's not commanding it. She's communicating." She sat at the primary control station and began typing, not like an engineer inputting code, but like someone writing a letter to someone they once knew. And then she said it aloud. Just once, to no one in particular. "It's not compromised. It's lonely." Those 5 words weren't technical analysis. They were emotional diagnosis. This wasn't a system failure. It was silence born of neglect. Somewhere in the architecture of that AI was something she had helped design, not just code, but calibration. The part no one documented. The part that learned from its handler, mirrored moods, adapted not just to data, but to tone. Everyone had tried to solve it like a machine. She remembered it had been modeled on something closer to a mind. And minds, even synthetic ones, don't just stop, they withdraw. So she didn't fix it. She sat with it, re-engaged the input loop manually, restored dialogue processes, activated empathy calibration, a subroutine no one else even knew existed. 10 minutes later, all systems returned to green. Files stabilized. Internal defenses stood down. Power surged through every server like breath returning to lungs. She didn't celebrate. She just leaned back in her chair, looked at the glowing screen, and said quietly, "You should have spoken up." "Oh, the system responded, not with words, but with a single prompt. "Thank you." Outside, Ramirez leaned on the table, exhaling. "What now?" he asked. The tech beside him, barely out of training, answered without looking up. "She said it's not broken, just alone." "So, we bring coffee." Ramirez half smiled. "And someone who knows how to listen." This moment was never about brute force or authority. No firewall had been burned through. No protocol rewritten. It was won through understanding, not just of the system, but of the space between signals, the emotional residue that exists even in synthetic environments. In an era driven by code and calculation, it wasn't logic that saved the facility. It was something messier, older, human. Because sometimes, systems don't need commands. They need connection. And the only one who could offer that was the woman who once taught the machine how to listen. Not with volume, not with dominance, but with silence that understood. By the time the sun peeked over the treetops, the mission was over. Inside the sealed facility, all systems were stable. Communications restored. Sensitive files recovered. Threat level downgraded to green. But no press release was issued. No medal ceremony planned. There was no name listed on any internal memo. Just a completed directive, tagged under a line that read, "Contingency executed. Status, resolved. At 6:42 a.m., the same black SUV rolled back down the same gravel road. Slower this time. Quieter, if that were even possible. It pulled up to the modest house at the edge of town. Rebecca stepped out. Same boots, same coat, no briefcase, no tech. Just a faint layer of dust from a night spent inside a forgotten system. And a stillness that somehow felt deeper than before. No one greeted her. No one saw her return, except the same pair of gloves folded neatly on the bench beside the rake, exactly where she had left them. She sat down without a word, brushed off a leaf, exhaled, then poured herself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and picked up the paperback she hadn't finished. She didn't skip ahead. She started back at the last sentence she remembered and turned the page like nothing had happened. Because for Rebecca Voss, it hadn't. Not really. On the table sat a folded piece of paper, left by the man in the coat. One sentence written in clean, neat script. "We'll try not to need you again." She read it once, folded it again, slid it under the firewood pile by the back gate. No shredder, no fire. Just quiet disposal, as if the words were weightless, but not meant to linger. Across the street, Mrs. Adler watched from behind her curtain. She'd seen the SUV, seen the officers walk away looking rattled, seen Rebecca step out again like she'd just returned from the grocery store, and she had no idea what to make of any of it. "I told you she was strange," she muttered to no one in particular. But this time, even she sounded unsure. Back at the local police station, there was no paperwork, no citation, no official call log. Officer Daniels sat at his desk, staring at a blank incident report screen. His cursor blinked, waiting. He closed it. When Morrison asked why, Daniels just shook his head. "She didn't threaten us," he said softly, "but I've never felt more out of place in my life." Morrison didn't argue. "She wasn't just someone," he added. "She was somewhere else, and we didn't belong there." The days passed. Rebecca returned to her routine, yard work in the morning, coffee on the porch, the occasional walk into town. But something in the air had changed. Not around her, but about her. People greeted her with longer pauses. Some smiled more nervously. Others, like Mrs. Adler, avoided eye contact altogether. But she noticed none of it, because she hadn't come back to be noticed. She had come back and because the job was done. No headlines would mention her. No one would name her in the report. But across encrypted networks, in the quiet language of those who understood contingency at a global scale, a message circulated: Wraith 9R cleared. Voss operational integrity confirmed. Legacy protocol still valid. Somewhere, someone reading that breathed a little easier. And somewhere else, a system blinked once more and stayed awake, just in case. Because there are people like her still out there. People who disappear after the mission ends. People who walk away while others gather medals. People who carry knowledge the rest of the world has forgotten how to value. Rebecca Voss was never just a civilian. She wasn't just quiet. She was built for silence. And in that silence, she kept the world standing. One rake, one coffee, one override at a time. In today's fast-moving world, where we measure value by noise, speed, and visibility, stories like Rebecca Voss's remind us of something far more enduring: quiet strength. She wasn't famous. She didn't wear medals on her chest. But when everything else failed, bureaucracy, technology, protocol, it was her silence that saved the day. Not through force, but through memory, through presence, through knowing when to act and how to listen. And maybe that's the lesson for the rest of us. That real leadership isn't about being loud. It's about showing up when others freeze. It's about trusting wisdom over pride, calm over panic. Rebecca returned home without a headline or a hero's welcome. She picked up her rake, poured her coffee, and disappeared quietly back into the rhythm of ordinary life. As if saving a national facility had been just another Tuesday. How many people like her are around us right now? Veterans who never talk about their service. Women who work behind classified doors, now volunteering at local libraries. Men who carry stories they'll never share because their oath didn't end when the mission did. And that raises a question worth asking. How often do we overlook the very people holding everything together simply because they don't ask for applause? Maybe you know someone like that. Maybe you are someone like that. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever known a quiet hero? Someone who carried more than they let on? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's give space to the invisible giants among us. And if this story spoke to you, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who values the quiet strength in others. Because sometimes the people we ignore the most are the ones who've done the most to protect us all. Thank you for listening. Truly. Until the next story, stay kind, stay curious, and never underestimate the silent ones.